be seated. Good job, Rex. Because he didn't stumble, you don't realize how many big words there were in that passage. Syro-Phoenician, Decapolis, Tyre, Sidon. You know, what's Jesus doing in all these places? It just begins by saying, and from there he went to Tyre. I mean, we dismiss a sentence like that. What's he doing in Tyre? Tyre is up north. It's like saying from Columbus he went to Detroit. Well, why is he up in Detroit? Jesus has had a very busy first 7 chapters in Mark. You know, he's been baptized, he's been tempted in the wilderness, he's called his disciples, he's performed lots of healings, he's multiplied the loaves and the fishes, he's walked on water, he's had confrontations with the Pharisees in many places, he's sent out the disciples on their mission. He's got to be tired after 7 chapters. I mean, he's got to be exhausted. We would be exhausted. It's very human to be exhausted. Tyre is north of where Jesus' field of operation is. In all likelihood, Jesus went there for a break. He went there for a vacation. He went there to get away from the emails. He went there to get away from the cell phones. He went to get away from people who knew him so he could have a rest. You know, and the next 2 sentences basically say that. You know, Jesus went to a house and didn't want anybody to know he was there. But he couldn't hide. You know, even there, he can't get a break. And this Syro-Phoenician woman comes to him. And she wants Jesus to heal her daughter. And Jesus' response is really quite rude. She says, you know, Lord, please heal my daughter. And Jesus says, it's not right to give the children's bread to the dogs. And he's calling her a dog. He's rude to her. Now, maybe he's rude just because he doesn't want to be interrupted. He wants to take the day off. You know, come back tomorrow when I'm rested up. It's very human. Another reason why he might be treating her this rudely is there's quite a bit of difference between Jesus and this woman. First of all, he's a man, she's a woman. Second of all, she's a Syro-Phoenician, Philistines, the Philistines. And the Philistines and the Jews are historic enemies. The Jews would have seen a Syro-Phoenician as inherently wicked and evil. So you've got this ethnic religious separation between Jesus and the woman. And in all likelihood, she was probably well-to-do and he wasn't. So you've got an economic difference. And maybe he was rude to her because she just wasn't his kind. You know, his mission was not to deal with her. His mission was to deal with his own people. So I don't have any business with you. And she responds to him, yeah, but even the dogs, and dog here is very derogatory, even the dogs eat the bread under the table. And Jesus says, you're right. You're right. And at this moment, Jesus realizes that he's got to expand his mission. He's got to become more inclusive, and the mission is more than just the people of Israel. It's to all people. He changes here. He changes and broadens his view. That's very human. From there, it says he went to Sidon. Now, Sidon is even further north, on his way to the Sea of Galilee. That's like saying Jesus is in Detroit and he returns to Columbus by way of the Upper Peninsula. You know, the geography here is so messed up. The only reason I can see Jesus going that far north is because he wants to extend his vacation. And then it says he gets back to his home territory, and immediately the crowd brings to him a deaf man. Deaf people, I don't know if you'd call them outsiders, but they were certainly second class in that society. A deaf person would have been considered mentally ill and a minor, and they would not be held responsible for keeping the law. So they weren't part of the worshiping community. Just like the Syrophoenician woman, he's an outsider. And Jesus calls the man aside. And I love the tenderness of this. He calls the man aside and heals him in private. This past Wednesday, I spent, 5 or 6 hours with somebody in the emergency room of a local hospital. And there were so many people in the waiting room that they couldn't take everybody to the private rooms to be examined. And people had to wait a long time in the waiting room. And I was sitting next to a woman who was with her husband and infant. And the woman just had a bowl that she just kept throwing up in. And I thought, wish she could have some privacy. I wish she could have some privacy. And Jesus gives this man the privacy he desires. And then Jesus sighs deeply. Why do we sigh? That's so human when we sigh. We sigh when we're frustrated. We sigh when we don't know what to do next. We sigh when we're tired. We sigh when we're exhausted. I served a church that had a divorced and separated group. And my gosh, every Sunday night you just sit in that room and listen to people sigh. It's very human to sigh. And Jesus looks at this man and he sighs. And then he says, and Rex got this right, Ephatha, which is Aramaic for open up or be opened. And the man is healed, he can hear, and he can become now part of the worshiping community. He can be treated as an adult. There are two things I like about this passage, these two healing stories. The first is that Jesus is very human. I can relate to a very human Jesus. I have trouble relating to a divine Jesus. We're taught that Jesus is fully human and fully divine, but somewhere along the way, I think we lose this notion of Jesus' full humanity. By the time I got to college, I had pretty much given up on relating to Jesus because I saw him as fully divine, walking 3 feet off the ground, with a halo. But he didn't have the worries I had. He didn't have the discouragements. He didn't have the failures. He didn't experience the loneliness. And I just didn't relate to Jesus anymore. And what a revelation it was for me to realize at some point in my life that Jesus was fully human. He did hunger. He did thirst. He was lonely. He was frustrated. He was rude, just like me. It was a Jesus I could relate to. Couldn't relate to the perfect Jesus, but I could relate to the human Jesus. I think that we know that's true in our lives. It's very hard for us to relate to perfect people. It's very hard to us to relate to people who have no problems. They just don't understand us. And how often, do we connect with someone when we find out they're as messed up as we are? How often do we connect when we find out, oh, you went through a divorce also. Oh, you've got cancer also. Oh, your child hates you too. Yeah. That's when we connect to people on the level of their humanity. That's where we find community. We connect at the level of brokenness. In the communion service, Jesus does not call the bread his body until it's broken. He breaks the bread and says, "This is my body." That's our cue that we meet Jesus not on the level of his perfection and not on the level of our perfection, but on his level of brokenness and our level of brokenness. It's very important to know that Jesus is fully human and suffers like we do. The second thing I like about this passage is Jesus says, be open. Open up. Now clearly the man's ears are to be opened up and his tongue is to become untied so he can speak clearly. But the woman and the deaf man, in coming to Jesus, had to open up first. They had to open up their humanity to Jesus. And they took a risk in opening up who they were to Jesus. I mean, the woman did get shot down, but she persisted. They showed who they were. I think one of the most profound moments in a person's life could be when they screw up the courage to go to an AA meeting for the first time and open up and say, "My name is Bob and I'm an alcoholic." They show their full humanity. Everybody needs to open up and show their humanity. Everybody, I think, is in a closet. It's not just LGBT persons. Everybody is in a closet. We're in a closet of fear, and we need to open up the door and come out. We can be in a closet of loneliness. We can be in a closet of addiction. We can be in a closet of bitterness. We can be in a closet of perceived perfection. And we need to come out of that closet and show our humanity. People have said to me, gosh, when I come to King Avenue, I experience such a different spirit. There's an energy there that I don't experience in other churches. There's a joy and there's a grace that I don't experience in other churches. Here's why I think it is. Because I have experienced it too. I experienced it when I first came here. We have a lot of LGBT persons in our congregation who have opened up, who have come out and taken a risk and shown who they are. And what that does is release an energy in them and releases a grace and a spirit in them that's contagious. And it affects the straight people who then are given the courage to open up themselves and come out. If there's any argument why gays should be accepted in a church, this is it. Because they help the straight people so much in coming out of their closets and being fully human. So these two people open up, and Jesus is calling us to open up our humanity. And Jesus himself opens up and changes his thinking. And it's a call for us to open up and change our thinking on people. and to open up to others. You know, there are people I need to listen to whom I'm spiritually deaf. There are people and causes I need to speak up for where my tongue is tied. And I need to come out and do that. You know, this week we all saw the migration tragedy in the Middle East and in Europe. And there's a call for the European Union to open up its borders and accept the outsiders. You know, last year there were calls around the world for the United States to open up its borders too, to immigrants and children fleeing Central America. Countries and people need to open up. I've told this story before, but I like it. Many years ago, I was driving through a godforsaken stretch of Pennsylvania, and I was listening to the radio, and it was late at night, and it was one of those, the radio was playing this song that was 5 songs all jumbled up, and you had to identify the 5 songs, and if you identified all 5, you got a trip to Obet's or something, I don't know. And so, they were, people were calling in identifying these 5 songs. And 3 of the songs were gotten rather quickly. They were easily identifiable. And people were having great difficulty getting the last 2. And it went on and on. I thought, gosh, you got to get this before I drive out of your range. I got to know these 5 songs. And the disc jockey said, here's what I think you're doing, and here's what I think you're doing as you listen to this song. You've got the first 3, and you're focusing on the 2 you don't know. And he said, when you focus on the 2 you don't know, you're not going to get it. What you need to do is focus on the 3 that you know. And the other 2 will slip into your mind and sink into your brain, and you'll figure them out rather quickly. Sure enough, almost immediately somebody got the 4th song, and with 10 minutes they got the 5th song. Focus on what you know, and the other stuff will sink in. Focus on what you know about Jesus. Focus on the frustration. Focus on some indecision. Focus on broadening his mission. Focus on his being hungry and his sighing. Focus on those things that are human, that we know. And the divinity sinks in. And you come to understand that Jesus is not just fully human, he's fully divine. And it's that fully divine piece of Jesus that then can sink into our humanity, where we can become Christ-like and have God's Spirit within us. Focus on what you know, and you'll be opened up to the Spirit of Christ. May it be so. Amen.